Welcome in. In this video, we're going to be talking about one of the most beautiful pieces of classical music, and that is the second movement of Pathetique Sonata, which happens to be written by one of my favorite composers, Beethoven. If you're not even familiar with it, I think you're going to just instantly fall in love with it. I'm going to start out by playing the first 8 measures for you so you can kind of get a good sound of it in your ear. But we're not just going to spend this video listening to beautiful music. We're going to talk about too. So you're going to learn a few things. You're going to learn about the melody, shape, contour. We're going to talk about harmony. I'm a huge chord person. We're going to talk about the harmony of the piece. Then also deal with a little less talked about topic, which is the texture, like how Beethoven uses the different parts, the melody, the bass, and the inner voices to kind of all blend together to make a really cool sound. But before I talk anymore, let's listen to it. Now, there's a lot we could talk about, even just those first 8 measures. And I actually went back and forth quite a bit, trying to decide what's the best place to start. And I think I landed on the best place to start would be the most unique thing. So let's talk about texture first. We're going to jump right to measure 1 and look at the texture. You're going to notice right from the beginning here that we have 3 different things going on. If we look at the music vertically, look at the music up and down. At the very top there, we have the soprano, or the top part, the melody. Just a C. The top part here, the melody, the very top voice is a C. Now we also have in the middle some wiggling 16th notes. Ignore that for right now. Let's jump down to the lowest note on the very bottom. We're going to call this the bass, which is, you can call it the bottom note, but often we refer to that as the bass. We kind of often assign the highest note, the soprano word, even though technically this might be a little more of an alto range. In the lowest part, we call the bass, even if, in this case, it really is the bass, but even if it was more in the tenor range, that's just kind of the terms we use as piano players. So we have top part, melody or soprano, bottom part, bass note. And then in the middle of the texture, Beethoven fills out the chord. He kind of fleshes out this piece with this oscillating 16th note, which you can kind of think of as finishing up the chord. And we're not always getting all the information we need for the chords in the outer voices. So Beethoven supplies the extra notes here. Now, we often just call that the inner voice. There are some contexts, like if you're playing Bach and there are truly 3 independent parts, you might call that a tenor or an alto. But in this kind of context where it's more just filling out chords, keeping the music going, it kind of has this running pattern so the sound doesn't die away, we often just refer to that as the inner voice. So this is 3-voice texture, which lots of us piano players actually like to refer to as 3-hand texture because it's kind of like an ego thing, right? You're like, oh, this is 3-hand texture. It actually takes 3 hands to play this, but I only got 2. But 3-hand texture, 3-voice texture. The basic idea here is if we look at the first 4 measures, it really works for the first 8. If you look at just the first 4 measures, you can track any one of those 3 parts all the way through. And let's do just that. I'm going to play just the first 4 measures, just the melody. The melody is one of the most important parts, right? So let's listen to the first 4 measures, just the top note, just the melody. Now, if you are already familiar with this piece, you probably knew that already, right? That's kind of maybe someone said, hey, what are you talking about? And you sang it to them. You probably would sing just that. That's kind of what the tune or the melody, the soprano is, where the part we would sing if we were trying to sing the song. So you probably already knew that exists. Let me jump down to the bottom now. I want to play the bass for you. This is the next part of the texture. And already at this point, this is the part that lots of people kind of forget about. They kind of just think about the melody up here. And they're not necessarily thinking about how there's actually a real bass line down there. So I'm going to play just the bass for you and listen to how the bass is almost its own little melody to itself. Isn't that a great jump in there? You have this very, very dramatic, and that can be so easily kind of passed over if you're not thinking, oh, these are just a bunch of notes. You could, the worst case scenario, you're just like, oh, there's a bunch of notes I gotta play. The next step would be, oh, there's a lot of notes, but there's a melody. But really what you have to do is say, well, there's a melody and there's a bass, and you can miss out on cool stuff like that octave leap there. So now what we're going to do, before I talk about the inner voice, is just listen to that top voice, that melody, with just the bass. Because what composers, like great composers, and Beethoven would definitely be included here, they really care about, what they do is they really care about how that melody and the bass sound together. That's kind of like the fundamental of the entire piece. The bass is a support down here, and the melody is going to make sense of that. So what I'm going to do is play that same little group for you, but play it hands together. But I'm going to leave out all the wiggling in the middle. We're just going to focus on the bass and the soprano. I lied. I'm going to stop a little early. Wasn't that cool already, though? Instead of it just being, we actually heard almost the inverse in the left hand. Instead of going, it starts with a jump and then falls. So they're going to do the opposite of each other. So, okay, I'll go on this time. Something else really cool to point out here is right there in measure 2, the left hand bass note moves, but the right hand is still stuck on the melody. It kind of brings attention to the fact that the bass is doing this, but the melody gets stuck on that E flat. I don't know if I played that loud enough. And maybe for a second here, you're just getting a little lost and you're like, well, what does this actually mean when you're playing? Should I actually bring some of that stuff out? Yeah, you can totally bring some of that stuff out. You can bring attention to the fact that the bass moved on. And actually, we're going to see in a second here, the middle voice moves on too. But the melody, that third voice, but the most important voice on top, the melody, got stuck on E flat for an extra half beat. Ready? The melody didn't move. It's stuck, and it moves there. Okay, now let's talk about the middle voice here. This is the least important voice, but you notice it has the most activity. And this can often confuse people. They think it has the most notes, so it's easy to not really think about the fact that, well, it has the most notes, but it's the least important. So that's actually, now this is not unique to this piece. This happens in tons of classical music, but that's a big challenge. The part that is least important I mean, admit it, if you heard that, you wouldn't know it was to this piece. You probably would, if you knew the piece, you might know the melody belongs, maybe the bass, but this is just sort of like a generic little, I mean, there are tons of pieces that do that same pattern there. So this is the least important part, but it has the most notes. So what I was getting at earlier was that you have to balance that now. This can't be that loud. So a big mistake in this piece would be to do this. Hear how much attention that middle voice is stealing away from the melody. In fact, when I first played it, if I would have played it that poorly, you might not have liked that sound that much. I would have sat down just went. You also notice the piece feels really fast because there's a fast note in there that I'm playing really loudly. Now I'm going to do it correctly again. I'm going to try to bring out the melody, the top voice here, the most. I'm going to attempt to make the bass the second loudest, and then really try to fit this third voice, that inner voice in there, super soft in the middle like this. While we're on the topic of voices and texture, I kind of want to address a common problem, and that is it's sometimes difficult to tell how many voices there are, which you might think sounds kind of silly, right? If I said, hey, we're going to play a 2-player game, how many players play? Well, 2. Or if I said basketball's 5 against 5. Well, let's see, 5 and 5. So 10 people play basketball, right? It's not quite that easy in classical music. You can't always just count the total number of notes that you see and say that's how many voices there are. So to show you an example of this, we're going to jump down to measure, I can't see that far away. Measure 17. I try to keep my music out of the camera shot so everyone can see the keys, but it means that my music is like 4 feet away from me or something, which is a little hard to read. So we're going to jump to measure 17. And right off the bat, measure 17 is obviously a 2-voice texture. It has to be. There's only 2 voices going on at the same time. We got the melody, and we got this little repeated C down here. No problems. 2-voice texture. Well, look at the next measure. Here, the left hand starts playing chords. So if you were just to literally count how many things were happening at one time, you're going to see that for the most part, there are 4 different notes happening. You're going to have a right hand note, but you would be wrong to call that 4-voice texture. It's not more voices in the beginning. Actually, it's fewer. In this case, we don't really have a bass note that's operating much separately than the chord itself. Now, yes, the bottom note of the chord is called the bass note, but it's not really its own voice. It's not like we're doing something like, then that would be its own voice down there. But in this case, we're just playing chords. You wouldn't call that a separate voice. So in this case, we actually still have 2-voice texture. 2-voice. Still 2-voice. Still 2-voice. Now, the second main thing we're going to talk about here is the melody. Now, again, if you've been around the channel before, you know I love harmony. I love chords. We'll talk about the chords. We're going to go into depth on the chords in just a minute here, but there's really one big thing you can learn from the melody here, and I think it's really important. I'll just tell you the concept first, and then we'll look at the first 8 measures again or so. The concept is this. Often when you have large leaps in the melody, when the melody just jumps, like maybe think of large as like maybe a 4th or higher. When it has a jump, it's almost always balanced with movement in the opposite direction. There was a jump. Do you hear that? We went down. We jumped. We're expecting movement in the opposite direction, basically to counterbalance that big jump. It's like a rubber band. You stretch the rubber band really far this way, and it really wants to kind of pull back a little bit. Now, it doesn't always work that way with steps, but when you have a jump, we just kind of have that, when we went so far, it kind of needs to fall back in the other direction. So again, we have this. We jump. And then we fall back. Which, if you've never thought about before, is part of the reason why I think Beethoven makes that 3rd note longer. Because he knows in our ear, in our minds, we're like, okay, that note has to go back down. We just jumped. We wouldn't expect this. That's like, oh, that's just higher, right? We expect it to fall back down, but he makes us wait for it. We do this. We make it back to that point. Okay, next the melody does this. There's another big jump. Now, I told you jumps should be balanced in the opposite direction. I literally just told you that, right? And you're thinking, right, it already broke the rule. There was a jump, and it kept going up. Well, first of all, it's not a rule. It's not a rule. It's what typically happens, but don't think of these things as like this has to happen this way. There'll be tons of exceptions, but there is the general pull of the melody that once you do a jump, you should go back down. Well, guess what? It does. It does. It just takes one extra note to get there. Beethoven tricks you with one bonus note. Okay, now let's go on with the melody. We have this. This is where it gets really, really skippy. This. Now that's a big jump down. That's a 5th down. He should fill in the gap. And guess what he does? There's another one. So far, all the big jumps have been balanced. Here, down, fill it in, another big jump. Now this one is a shocking note that I'm not going to explain much until we talk about chords in a minute here. This is a shocking note. Just know this note should go to B flat. That weird, ugly, shocking note really needs to go to B flat. And it does kind of, it just takes a minute to get there. That's where it wants to go. Okay, as promised, let's talk about some chords here. So we're going to use the Roman numeral analysis. And the main thing you need to know, if you don't understand everything about Roman numerals right now, basically just know 5 chords. Want to go to 1 chord for right now. And also 2 chords, want to go to 5 chords, which want to go to 1 chord. So if you want to take one more step back, you can do a 2 chord, which goes to 5, which goes to 1. And that's enough to work with right now. So we start off here, A flat chord. It goes to E flat 7. E flat is 5 in the key of A flat. So we've just done 1 chord. This is your first chord in the key of A flat. Then 1 through a 5, E flat. This has to go to A flat. It needs to go there. And then we go to another E flat chord, which has to go back to an A flat chord. So the first 5 chords we get is A flat, E flat, A flat, E flat, A flat, E flat, A flat, E flat, A flat, 5 chords. And all those E flats have 7s on them. So it's A flat, E flat 7, A flat, E flat 7, A flat. And so it's just 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. 5, 1, 5, 1, 5. Now here's a shocker, kind of. This is F minor, which is 6, which if you're a pop musician, you're probably thinking, 6, whatever. And classical music is a little more rare, but it happens, right? So here's a 6 chord. Then we get this one, which is actually B flat 7, a B flat 7 chord, which I don't want to get too deep into all the ins and outs of the harmony, especially how harmonic progressions work. I did a video that really gets into how chords are analyzed, their context and all that. So if you want to get more details about that first, check out this video here, and then come back to this. I'm just going to try to keep moving with harmonic analysis for right now. But if you're confused about some of the basics of this, you can check that video out. But the basic idea here is that B flat 7 is a 5 chord, but it's not the 5 chord of A flat. B flat is the 5 of E flat. So when he goes to that B flat 7 chord, he's driving to the E flat, which sounds like it does, right? When you go to that E flat, you're like, whew, you get. Then if you want to get a little deeper than that, F minor chord, the 6th chord that I told you was a little weird. Well, F minor is a 6 in the key of A flat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it's a 2 in the key of E flat, and 2 chords are super normal, and 2s want to go to 5. So we have in the key of E flat, we have a 2 chord, we have a 5 chord, and we have a 1 chord. And now this is where an interesting topic always arises. So did we modulate, did we change keys to the key of E flat, and we went 2, 5, 1? Or are we still in the key of A flat, and this was just 2 of 5, and then this is 5 of the 5 chords? You can basically analyze it all as if you're still in the key of A flat and just say, well, this is still E flat, still 5. So B flat 7 is the 5 of the 5. And my general advice is it really doesn't matter. In these short temporary moves to a new key like this, where you're not going to stay in that key for long, you're going right back to the original key, don't waste your life. Don't stress about too much. Like, it doesn't really matter. Either you temporarily moved to the key of E flat and you were really there, then you immediately left, or you just for a split second made everyone think E flat was the key, which is kind of the same thing, right? It doesn't really make a lot of sense to just stress and battle about that. Like, just know that for a moment, for a couple beats, Beethoven makes it sound like E flat is the new key, but then it's going to go right back to it. So I'm going to the first 3 measures, kind of hear that, or I guess 4, hear that in context. Here for just a moment, we're going to switch to the key of E flat, but then he'll go back to A flat pretty quickly. Like, oh, we're in the key of E flat? Nope. Now, this is probably the most interesting chord in the whole thing. All the other chords, they're cool, beautiful sounding chords, but this is the one that kind of stands out as being odd the most. When you first hear it, you get that. Which, if you want to analyze it as a G half diminished 7, I mean, you're welcome to. He kind of did write a G half diminished 7, but I don't think it's G half diminished 7. I think this is just an E flat chord slowly becoming E flat 7. We have an E flat chord, but then here it's just E flat 7. So I think all that's happening is we're hearing E flat 7, but the top note, the E flat, went up to F for a second first. So it's weird, but if you literally, he did write a G half diminished 7. So if you want to analyze it as a G half diminished 7, you're perfectly welcome to. It'd be G half diminished 7, which G in the key of A flat would be 7. So this would be a 7 half diminished 7, which would then go to a 5 chord and then back to 1. Either way, when we get to this point, measure 6, we've landed back on our 1 chord. We can finally kind of like breathe easy, right? We've had our kind of weird foray into E flat, weird chord, either a 5 chord with the wrong note on top or a G half diminished 7. Oh, E flat 7. Now we're back home. We're in A flat. And then we get, so you thought you were safe, but you're not. You get A flat. That chord is really, really shocking. This is the note I told you we'd come back around to when I talked about the melody earlier. I said, oh, don't worry. Later on, we will deal with this note. This is actually a very normal chord. Really, the only shocking thing about this whole chord here is the fact that the melody jumps from down to here and then back up to there. Other than that, this chord is completely normal. This is an F7 chord. And again, just F dominant 7. F chords, like dominant F chords, it's the 5 of B flat. So this is, again, just like earlier, we had the B flat 7, went to E flat for a split second. This is just an F7. Well, F is the 5 chord of B flat. So this is just the 5 of 2 in the key of A flat. B flat's the 2 chord, and we're going to the 5 of the B flat. So instead of just going directly from A flat to B flat minor, Beethoven takes his A flat, plays the 5 of B flat minor first, and then goes to B flat minor. And the funny thing is, he could have done this in a way less skippy way in the melody. He could have written, he's actually already on that note, which belongs to the F chord. So he totally could have done this. Sorry, I have to recompose Beethoven. I need to leave the E flat out of the left hand, so. It's actually kind of pretty. I know it's a little shocking, but it's kind of pretty. It's a pretty progression. But Beethoven decides to go out of his way to make this piece really skippy, which again is kind of humorous to me, because if you were like doing this for a college theory assignment, you should take the easiest route and avoid losing points in any way possible. You would just play an E flat, then you would just stay on E flat, then resolve the E flat down like it should. Instead, Beethoven's already on the E flat. He's like, yeah, but I want that melody to play the A. But once he plays the A, that A really needs to resolve up to B flat. And it does, eventually. There. Now I'm going to give you a huge technique tip in just a minute here. But before we do, we're talking about Pathetique. Talk about Pathetique and harmony in Pathetique, we got to spend just a couple minutes on the C section. So Pathetique is a rondo. We're going to hear the melody. That's the A section. We're going to do something different. That was this thing. We're going to go back to the melody. And then we're going to hear, so we have A, B, A, melody, something different, main melody, something more different, the C section. And that's a section over here. And then eventually we're going to get back to the melody. And that's what kind of defines a rondo. A, B, A, C, A. Main thing, something different. Main thing again, something more different. Main thing again, then you could, if you had a 7-part rondo, it could be different, but this isn't. This is just 5 parts, A, B, A, C, A. The C section here is incredible. First of all, you just finished up the main melody in the key of A flat. And you just go directly to A flat minor. Which is already kind of weird, a direct modulation, but it happens. What is even more weird is in the second here, Beethoven's going to go to the key of E major. And this is such a shocking key to go to. I even wrote actually an entire college paper on this piece and the key change right here, because the key of E major is nothing like the key of A flat. A flat has 4 flats. E major has 4 sharps. So we have become 8 sharps. We've sharped 8 times, right? We had to get rid of the 4 flats, go to the key of C, then add 4 sharps to get back to the key of E. And relative to the key of A flat, the key of E major, well, E is your 5, E flat was 5, right? So it's a key of sharp 5, which doesn't really mean a lot to us musicians. Like, hey, go to the key of sharp 5. Like, okay, there's no correlation to anything we know. However, to keep this brief, it's not really the key of E major. It's actually the key of flat 6, which is a lot more common. But in the key of A flat, flat 6 is F flat, right? So we're not going to get into all the details, but imagine you're in the key of C for a second and you go to the key of A flat. You should call that A flat probably and not G sharp, because flat 6 is more common. It has a more clear connotation. You keep playing a C chord. Here's your 6th chord, your A minor. Here's your flat 6 chord. That makes more sense because you kind of hear how it sounds sort of like the A, but now it's A flat. So you shouldn't call it G sharp because that would be completely changing the spelling of everything. But in the key of A flat, flat 6 is F flat. So this would be an F flat chord. And the key of F flat has 8 flats: F flat, G flat, A flat, B double flat, C flat, D flat. I can't even do this. E flat, F flat. Way too many flats. So Beethoven, the reason I was bringing this up, the reason I wrote a paper about this is because Beethoven actually does us all a favor. He says, you know what? We're all pianists here. We're all playing piano. Well, maybe you're not, but everyone playing this piece is a pianist. Like, we don't want to read in 8 flats. We'd all rather read in 4 sharps. So he just takes out all the flats, adds in 4 sharps, and just makes our life a lot easier. So when you play this section here, sorry for the wrong note there, but when you're playing that section, don't stress about the fact that there's all these sharps written in your music. Just take a deep breath and realize that he could have and he should have written this in 8 flats, which would have been way worse. So, okay, real quick technique tip at the end here. At the very beginning of this piece, you have this. And most of your scores will write it that way. It's going to write where your right hand covers both these notes. It's going to seem silly, but it will make your life a lot better. And it's a lot easier if for just the first measure or measure and a half, actually, take both the inner voice and the bass with your left hand. This is just such a practical tip to apply to any piece, even if it only lasts for 1 or 2 notes. In this case, it happens for a measure and a half, but even if it's just 1 or 2 notes, if you can get your first melody note all by itself in your right hand, it's easy to do. If your right hand has 1 melody note and it just plays, hear how I brought that out? The beginning sounds beautiful and your audience immediately goes, boom, I hear that melody. If you do it this way, you're in danger of this. That A flat being too loud. And it's actually just, from a technical point of view, kind of hard because the A flat's higher. It's easy to play the A flat too loud. So just don't deal with the stress. Give yourself a measure and a half off. Make sure you begin as you mean to go. That very first thing you hear is beautiful. Yes, then right here you have to switch. But it actually gets a little easier at that point because there's a little more spacing. It's easier to hear. One of the more difficult ones to hear It's the first note. Then also you sit down if you are playing at a recital or you're playing at some event, you're playing for family on a piano that's not yours, or a keyboard, or you're at even a nice piano, something you're not comfortable or familiar with. It is so dangerous to sit down, just that first note, go, well, I hope I bring out that top note more than the bottom note. Again, just save yourself the stress. Sit down, just go and take both those notes in your left hand, one note in your right hand. There's your tip. Go play this piece. It's beautiful. You just take a little time, play through it. If you're kind of on that intermediate level, this is sort of like one of the first pieces beyond the standard intermediate stuff. In fact, I did a whole video where I kind of talked about Beethoven's easiest pieces to kind of jump into if you want to play a single movement of Beethoven, kind of get into maybe the first Beethoven sonata. And this piece was in that video. So if you want to, go check that out, just find other pieces. But this is a great one to start with. Now, if you've already watched the whole video on it, you already have a head start. So go enjoy it. If you're not a piano player, you just want to listen to it. Hopefully now you can listen to it with new ears. It just means a lot more to you next time you hear it. You hear all this cool stuff going on with the melody, with the harmony, and also that 3-voice texture. Go check it out. I'll see you later.